When a powerful sheik handed his maid's daughter a single dollar, he thought nothing of it. But what the little girl did with it would echo through his soul forever. He was a man who owned everything: towers, oil fields, empires, yet couldn't buy back the sound of laughter that once filled his home. The world called him a billionaire sheik, but behind the glass walls of his penthouse, he was just a man haunted by silence. Then one morning, a maid's daughter, curious, bright-eyed, and uninvited, stepped into that silence and asked a question that cracked his world open. To dismiss her, he handed her a single dollar. A meaningless gesture, a dollar to make her go away. But what she did with that single bill would leave him speechless and change both of their lives forever. And before I forget, where are you watching from today? Leave a comment below. We love seeing how far these stories reach. Enjoy the story. A single dollar bill can't buy much, but it can purchase a future. This is a story about a man who had everything but felt nothing, and a little girl who had nothing but gave everything. Their two worlds were about to collide in a way no one could have ever predicted. The silence in the penthouse was worth more than gold. It was a curated, manufactured silence, built by triple-pane glass that held the city's roar at bay, 80 stories below. It was the silence of thick, hand-woven carpets that swallowed the sound of every footstep. It was the silence of a man whose heart had forgotten how to make a noise. Sheikh Khalil al-Jamil stood before the vast window, his reflection a sharp silhouette against the sprawling metropolis. At 45, he was a titan of industry, a man whose name moved markets and made politicians tremble. His custom-tailored suit was a whisper of wealth, the watch on his wrist a marvel of engineering that cost more than a suburban home. He had built an empire from the ashes of his fathers, turning oil money into a global conglomerate of technology, real estate, and finance. Men respected him. Competitors feared him. But joy, that was a foreign currency his wealth could not acquire. His world was a fortress of marble, steel, and glass. It was a world of calculated risks and ruthless decisions. It was a world that had not seen a genuine smile from him in 5 long years. Not since the day he lost his wife, Layla, and their son, Omar, in a car accident on a winding coastal road. The world saw a powerful billionaire. He saw a king ruling over an empire of ghosts. A soft chime, barely audible, announced the arrival of his morning coffee. A moment later, Clara Mayhew entered the room. She was a woman in her late 30s, with tired eyes but a gentle strength that seemed to radiate from her. As the head maid for his private residence, she was efficient, quiet, and invisible, exactly as Khalil required. She placed the porcelain cup on a small table beside him, her movements precise and practiced. "Thank you, Clara," Khalil said, his voice a low rumble that rarely changed in tone. He did not turn to look at her. "You're welcome, Mr. Al-Jamil," she replied softly. As she turned to leave, a small figure peeked around the doorframe. It was Clara's daughter, Hazel. She was 8 years old, with hair the color of spun gold and eyes the color of a summer sky. She was not supposed to be here. Staff children were strictly forbidden on the residential floors. Clara had been forced to bring her today because the girls' school was unexpectedly closed for a plumbing emergency, and she couldn't find a sitter on such short notice. She had instructed Hazel to stay perfectly still and silent in the staff lounge, but the curiosity of an 8-year-old was a powerful force. Hazel stared at the tall, imposing man by the window. Her mother had told her he was very important, like a king in a storybook, but he just looked sad. Her great-grandfather, a decorated war hero whose portrait sat on her bedside table, had always told her you could see a person's true story in their eyes. This man's eyes looked empty. Khalil finally turned, his gaze falling upon the child. His brow furrowed in annoyance. He did not like disruptions. He did not like surprises. His entire life was structured to eliminate them. "Clara," he said, his voice sharp with displeasure. "I believe I made the rules on this matter perfectly clear." Clara's face paled. "I am so sorry, sir. It won't happen again." "Hazel, apologize to Mr. Al-Jamil and go back to the lounge immediately." Hazel stepped forward, her small hands clasped behind her back. She looked not at the floor in fear, but directly at Khalil. "I'm sorry for being where I'm not supposed to be, sir," she said, her voice clear and steady. "But I wasn't spying. I was just wondering if you could see the angels from up here." Khalil was taken aback. The question was so unexpected, so utterly out of place in his world of profit margins and hostile takeovers. The angels, he repeated, his tone flat. My great-grandpa told me they live up in the clouds, Hazel explained, her expression serious. He's up there with them now. I thought maybe, from your window, you might be high enough to see him. The mention of a lost loved one was a key turning in a lock Kalen thought was rusted shut. For a fleeting second, the image of his own son, Omar, flashed in his mind. Omar had been full of such questions, full of a wonder that Kalen had long since forgotten. The irritation in his chest softened, replaced by a hollow ache. He reached into his pocket, his movements stiff. He pulled out his wallet, a sleek piece of black leather, and extracted a $1 bill. He crouched down, an unfamiliar gesture that made his knees ache slightly, and held it out to the girl. Here, he said, his voice devoid of warmth. It was a dismissal, a transaction to make the uncomfortable moment end. Buy yourself some candy. Hazel looked at the dollar, then back at his face. She didn't immediately reach for it. Instead, her small hand came up and gently touched his sleeve. Your jacket is very soft, she said simply. Then, she took the $1 bill. Thank you, sir. I won't waste it. She gave a small curtsy, a gesture so old-fashioned it was almost comical, and disappeared back into the hallway. Clara, mortified, bowed her head. My deepest apologies, sir. Just ensure it doesn't happen again, Kalen said, turning back to the window, the brief crack in his armor already sealed. He dismissed the entire incident from his mind. It was a minor anomaly in a day that would be filled with billion-dollar decisions. He had a board meeting in an hour to discuss the demolition of the old Westwood building, a historic property his company had acquired. It was a drain on resources, occupying prime real estate. His chief advisor, Zaid, had been pushing for its removal for months, presenting data that showed a new skyscraper on that land would generate hundreds of millions in profit. The decision was logical. It was smart business. Kalen had already made up his mind. The building would come down. He didn't think about the little girl or her $1 bill for the rest of the day. He didn't think about her at all. But in the world of forgotten things and overlooked people, that $1 had just set a monumental chain of events into motion. For the next week, life returned to its rigid, silent routine. Kalen moved through his days like a ghost in his own life, from sterile boardrooms to lonely dinners. He signed the preliminary demolition orders for the Westwood building, ignoring a faint, unexplainable tug of reluctance. Zaid had praised his decisive leadership, assuring him it was the right, profitable choice. Clara, for her part, was a model of efficiency, her work flawless, her presence unobtrusive. She never brought Hazel to the penthouse again. The incident, it seemed, was forgotten by all. But Hazel had not forgotten, and she had not spent the $1 on candy. That $1 felt important. It was the first money she had ever been given by someone who wasn't family. It felt like a test. Her great-grandfather, Sergeant Walter Mayhew, had won a medal for his bravery in the war. He always said, "It's not the size of the gift that matters, kiddo. It's the size of the heart that gives it purpose." Hazel knew exactly what its purpose would be. On the south side of the Al Jamil estate was a place few people ever went. It was Layla's memorial garden. When Kalen's wife was alive, it had been her sanctuary, a breathtaking explosion of color and life. She had imported rare flowers from around the world, tended to the rose bushes herself, and spent hours on the stone bench under the willow tree. After her death, Kalen could not bear to look at it. He had ordered the groundskeepers to perform only basic maintenance. No new plantings, no special care. The garden, like its master, had slowly withered. The fountains were dry. Weeds poked through the flagstone paths. The rose bushes were overgrown and sad. It was a beautiful place dying of a broken heart. Hazel had seen the garden from a service window. She thought it was the saddest place she had ever seen. So, on Saturday, with her mother's permission, Hazel took that $1 to a small local nursery. It wasn't enough for a potted plant or a fancy flower, but it was enough for a small packet of marigold seeds and another of morning glories. They were simple, resilient flowers. Flowers that grew easily and brought a cheerful splash of orange and blue wherever they went. The next day, Hazel snuck into the memorial garden. The groundskeepers were off on Sunday. The air was still and heavy with the scent of decay. She found a small, empty patch of earth near the stone bench, where the sun shone through the willow branches. Her hands were small, but she worked with a determination that would have made her great-grandfather proud. She pulled the weeds, her face smudged with dirt. She loosened the soil with a fallen branch. She carefully planted the seeds, one by one, patting the earth down gently over them. She didn't have a watering can, so she used an old, discarded plastic cup she found near a service entrance, filling it again and again from a utility spigot on the side of the building. It took her almost an hour to give her small patch of hope a proper drink. When she was finished, she stood back and looked at her work. It was just a small square of dark, damp earth. But in her mind, she could already see the bright orange marigolds and the vibrant blue morning glories reaching for the sun. "This is for the sad king," she whispered to the seeds. "And for his angel." She continued her secret ritual every day. Before her school bus came, she would slip into the garden and use her plastic cup to water the seeds. She spoke to them, telling them they had to be strong, just like her great-grandpa had been. Kalen remained oblivious. His focus was on the Westwood building. The final demolition permits were due to be signed in 2 weeks. He was scheduled to give a speech at a press conference, announcing the project that would replace it, a sleek, impersonal tower of glass and steel to be named the Al Jamil Spire. One evening, unable to sleep, Kalen found himself wandering his penthouse. The silence was louder than usual. He walked past the closed-off room that had been his son's, the door a monument to his pain. He found himself on the terrace, staring down at the sprawling grounds of his estate. His eyes drifted to the south, toward the dark, forgotten corner that was his late wife's garden. And he saw something odd. A tiny, flickering light. His first thought was security. A trespasser. He picked up his phone, ready to call the head of his security detail. But then he paused. The light wasn't moving like a flashlight. It was small and low to the ground. Curiosity, an emotion he hadn't felt in years, got the better of him. He took the private elevator down to the ground floor and walked out into the cool night air. He stayed in the shadows, his expensive leather shoes silent on the stone path. As he drew closer, he realized the light was coming from a small, battery-operated lantern. And next to it, kneeling in the dirt, was Hazel. She was humming a soft tune, her small hands gently tending to a patch of earth. Kalen watched, hidden behind a large, untrimmed hedge. He saw her carefully watering something with a plastic cup. He could now see tiny green sprouts, barely an inch high, pushing their way up from the soil. He stepped out from the shadows. "What are you doing here?" His voice was not angry, but it was stern, and it made the little girl jump. Hazel scrambled to her feet, her eyes wide with fear. "I'm sorry, Mr. Al-Jamil. I know I'm not supposed to be here. I was just watering my flowers." "Your flowers?" Kalen looked down at the small patch of green. "Where did you get them?" "I bought them," she said proudly. "With the dollar you gave me. I bought seeds." She pointed to the barely visible sprouts. "Those are marigolds, and those are morning glories. My mom says they're happy flowers. I thought the garden looked sad, so I wanted to make it happy again." Kalen stared at the tiny sprouts, then at the girl. Her face was earnest, her explanation simple, and without any hidden motive. She had taken his dismissive, unthinking gesture, a single dollar meant to make her go away, and used it to try and heal a part of his world he himself had abandoned. She had planted life in a place he had surrendered to death. For the first time in 5 years, Kalen felt something shift inside him. A heavy, frozen thing deep in his chest cracked just a little. He looked at the garden, truly looked at it, for the first time since Layla's death. He saw the neglect. He saw the ghost of what it once was. And now, he saw this one small, defiant patch of new life. "You're not supposed to be here," he said again, but his voice was softer now. "But these flowers, they need water to grow. The spigot you are using is for unfiltered water. It could harm them." He walked over to a rusted control panel on the wall, a panel he hadn't touched in years. He flipped a series of switches. With a low groan, the underground pumps whirred to life. A moment later, the stone fountain in the center of the garden began to bubble, and the intricate sprinkler system hissed on, casting a gentle spray over the thirsty flower beds. Hazel gasped, her eyes shining as she watched the water dance in the moonlight. "You turned it back on." "The flowers need it," Kalen said, his throat feeling tight. "Come. It's late. You should be in bed." He walked with her back toward the staff quarters, a silent, imposing man next to a small girl with dirt on her knees. As they reached her door, he paused. "Hazel," he said. She turned to look up at him. "Thank you," he said. The words felt foreign on his tongue, but they were real. He watched her disappear inside, then stood there for a long moment in the silent hallway. He had spent millions on art, on cars, on buildings. He had donated vast sums to charities for the tax benefits and public acclaim. But a little girl with $1's worth of seeds had just given him a gift more valuable than his entire fortune. She had given him a flicker of hope. And as he walked back to his empty penthouse, he found himself thinking not of demolition permits or stock prices, but of what color the marigolds would be when they bloomed. The incident in the garden became Kalen's secret. He didn't mention it to anyone, not even Clara, but he began to change in small, almost imperceptible ways. He started his mornings on the terrace, not staring blankly at the city, but looking down at the memorial garden. He watched as Hazel, now with the benefit of the sprinkler system, continued to tend to her small plot. The sprouts grew taller, stronger. He found himself making excuses to walk through the lower floors in the late afternoon, around the time Hazel would be home from school. He would see her in the staff library, quietly doing her homework. He learned she was a bright student who loved to read, especially stories about history and great leaders. One afternoon, he approached her. He held a thick, leather-bound book in his hand. "I am told you enjoy reading," he said, his tone still formal. Hazel looked up, surprised. "Yes, sir. This was my son's favorite," he said, placing the book on the table. It was a collection of stories about legendary explorers. He read it so many times the cover fell off. "I had it rebound." Hazel looked at the beautiful book, then at Kalen's face. She saw the flicker of pain in his eyes. "What was his name?" she asked softly. "Omar," Kalen replied, the name a quiet gust of wind from the past. "It's a good name," Hazel said seriously. "I'll take very good care of his book." Their conversations became a quiet ritual. Kalen would ask about her day, about what she was learning. He never spoke of his own life, but he listened to her with an intensity that he usually reserved for high-stakes negotiations. He learned about her great-grandfather, Sergeant Mayhew, who had taught her that honor is what you do when no one is looking. He learned she wanted to be a teacher when she grew up. Through Hazel's simple, honest view of the world, Kalen began to see his own life in a new light. He saw the isolation he had built around himself, the emptiness of his pursuits. He was a man who owned skylines, but had no one to share the view with. Meanwhile, the pressure to demolish the Westwood building was mounting. Zaid, his chief advisor, was becoming more insistent. Zaid was a sharp, ambitious man who had been with Kalen for over a decade. He was trusted implicitly. "The investors are getting anxious, Kalen," Zaid said one afternoon in Kalen's office. "The final contracts need to be signed by Friday. Any delay will be seen as weakness. It could affect stock prices." "It's a historic building, Zaid," Kalen said, looking at the architectural drawings. The phrase sounded odd coming from his own mouth. A week ago, he wouldn't have cared. "It's an old, inefficient structure sitting on a billion-dollar piece of land," Zaid countered smoothly. "Its history is irrelevant to our portfolio. Progress demands we look forward, not back." That evening, Kalen was walking near the garden when he saw Hazel. She was sitting on the stone bench, the book about explorers open in her lap. The marigolds and morning glories were in full bloom now, a vibrant patch of orange and blue in the sea of muted, dying green. "What are you reading about tonight?" Kalen asked, sitting on the other end of the bench. "Ferdinand Magellan," Hazel said, her eyes bright with excitement. "He sailed all the way around the world. He wanted to see what was on the other side. He was a brave man," Kalen said. "And he preserved his ship," Hazel added, completely serious. "The Victoria. Because even when you're going somewhere new, you should never forget the things that got you there." That's what my great-grandpa used to say about his old army jeep. The words hit Kalen with an unexpected force. You should never forget the things that got you there. He thought of the Westwood building. It was the first major acquisition he had made with his father decades ago. It had been a risky move, one that had nearly bankrupted them, but it had paid off and laid the foundation for their entire real estate empire. His father had loved the building's classic architecture, its sense of history and permanence. Demolishing it wasn't just tearing down bricks and mortar, it was tearing down a piece of his own history, a part of his father. "Hazel," Kalen asked slowly, "what do you think is more important, building something new or saving something old? Hazel thought for a moment, tapping her chin. I think it depends. If the old thing is broken and sad, maybe you need something new. But if the old thing is still strong and just needs a little bit of help to be beautiful again, you should save it. Like this garden. From the mouths of babes. The cliché ran through Kalen's mind, but it was true. He was about to destroy his own legacy for a sterile, glass tower, all because his advisor told him it was profitable. He had been so lost in his grief that he had forgotten the lessons his own father had taught him. He had forgotten the value of history, a foundation. He looked at Hazel, who was now tracing the map of Magellan's voyage with her finger. He looked at the flowers she had grown with $1, and he made a decision. The next morning, he called an emergency meeting. Zaid, he said, his voice firm. Halt the demolition plans for the Westwood building. Effective immediately. Zaid's face, usually a mask of calm professionalism, showed a flash of shock, which he quickly concealed. Kalen, may I ask why? The contracts are ready. The press conference is scheduled. I am reconsidering the project, Kalen stated, offering no further explanation. Cancel the press conference. I want a full review of renovation options for the building. I want to know what it would take to restore it to its former glory. Zaid's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Restore it? Kalen, that would cost a fortune. The profits would be a fraction of what a new development would bring. Our shareholders will revolt. Let them, Kalen said, his eyes cold as steel. I own 51% of this company. This is my decision. See to it. As Zaid left the office, his composure finally cracked. He walked down the hall, his fists clenched, his face a mask of fury. This wasn't supposed to happen. Everything had been going according to plan. The demolition of the Westwood building was more than just a construction project. It was the key to his own personal empire. For months, he had been working behind the scenes, colluding with a rival developer. He had been feeding them inside information, sabotaging renovation proposals, and inflating demolition costs, all to ensure Kalen would have no choice but to tear the building down. Once demolished, Zaid's secret partners would swoop in, using the chaos he created to launch a hostile takeover of Al Jamil Industries. Zaid was promised a position as CEO and a massive share of the profits. He had been orchestrating Kalen's downfall for nearly a year, using the man's grief and detachment as a shield. And now, for some inexplicable reason, Kalen had changed his mind. Something had woken him up. Zaid had to find out what it was. And he had a suspicion it all started with a maid's daughter and a patch of flowers in a dead garden. His plan was on the verge of collapsing, and he was not about to let a little girl stand in his way. The game had changed. It was no longer about profit. It was about survival. Zaid returned to his own office, a sleek, minimalist space on the floor below Kalen's. He closed the door, the soft click echoing the finality of his shattered plans. For a moment, he stood perfectly still, his back to the door, his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. He had underestimated Kalen. He had mistaken the man's grief for permanent weakness, his apathy for a lasting stupor. It was a foolish, amateur miscalculation. He walked to his desk and stared out the window. His view was of the city's financial district, a forest of skyscrapers that represented the power he so desperately craved. He had been so close. The contracts were drafted. The backroom deals were sealed. The rival company was ready to pounce, and he, Zaid, was ready to ascend. Now, it was all unraveling. He needed to understand the why. Kalen Al-Jamil did not make decisions based on sentiment. He was a man of logic, of profit and loss. To suddenly reverse course on a billion-dollar project suggested a new variable had entered the equation. Something, or someone, had influenced him. Zaid was a man who believed in information. He had built his career on knowing things other people didn't. He picked up his phone and made a call to the head of estate security, a man on his personal payroll. I need a full review of all activity logs for the past 2 weeks at the main residence, Zaid said, his voice cold and precise. Every entry and exit, staff and guest. I also want all internal surveillance footage from the grounds, specifically the South Gardens. I'm looking for any anomalies, any unusual patterns of behavior from anyone, especially Al-Jamil himself. Sir, the security head replied, Mr. Al-Jamil's personal activities are usually flagged as private. This is not a usual request, Zaid hissed. Do it, and be discreet. He is not to know. Within hours, The data began to flow into Zaid's secure server. He spent the entire night sifting through it, his eyes scanning hours of grainy footage, cross-referencing timestamps with access logs. For the most part, it was mind-numbingly routine. Groundskeepers mowing lawns, delivery trucks arriving at service entrances, Clara Mayhew walking to and from the staff quarters. And then he found it. It started with a single instance of Kaylin walking in the South Garden late at night. Zaid zoomed in. He saw the flicker of a lantern. He saw the maid's daughter. He watched the silent, moonlit exchange. He saw Kaylin turn the sprinklers on. His blood ran cold. He kept digging. He found more footage. Kaylin sitting on the bench with the girl. Kaylin giving her a book. He saw them talking, day after day. This little girl, this insignificant child of a servant, was the variable. She had somehow burrowed her way into Kaylin's fortified heart and planted a seed of doubt. A seed that had just cost Zaid his entire future. A cold, calculated rage settled over him. His plan had not failed. It had merely encountered an obstacle that needed to be removed. He couldn't harm the girl, of course. That would be messy and would draw too much attention. But Clara Mayhew, she was another matter. A loyal employee, a single mother. A woman whose entire life depended on the goodwill of Kaylin Al-Jamil. A woman who could be made to disappear quite easily. His mind began to work, formulating a new, more ruthless plan. He would frame her. Theft was always a simple, effective charge. He would plant something valuable in her belongings, something Kaylin would be sure to miss. One of Layla's emerald necklaces, perhaps. He would make the discovery seem like an accident, a routine security check. Clara would be fired, disgraced, and forced to leave the estate immediately. Without the mother, the daughter would be gone as well. The source of the infection would be removed, and Kaylin, isolated once more, would surely revert to his old, predictable self. Zaid would then gently reintroduce the demolition plan, perhaps with a few cosmetic changes, and steer the ship back on course. It was a perfect, elegant solution. All he needed was the right opportunity. Kaylin, unaware of the serpent coiling in his own house, felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced since before the accident. Canceling the demolition was just the first step. He now looked at the neglected garden not as a painful reminder of his loss, but as a project, a way to honor Layla's memory, and a way to connect with the little girl who had reminded him what it felt like to care about something. He called the estate manager. "I want the memorial garden fully restored," Kaylin commanded. "Spare no expense. I want it brought back to exactly the way it was when my wife was alive. Hire the best landscape architects, the best botanists. I want it done, and I want it done right." But he did more than just give orders. The next Saturday, he changed out of his expensive suit and into a simple pair of trousers and a polo shirt. He walked down to the garden, where a team of landscapers was already at work, clearing away the dead foliage and preparing the soil. Hazel was there, watching the large, noisy men with a mixture of awe and apprehension. She was standing guard over her little patch of marigolds, afraid they would be bulldozed in the grand restoration. "They won't hurt your flowers," Kaylin said, his voice startling her. He was standing right behind her. "I've given specific instructions. This patch is to remain untouched." He then did something even more surprising. He picked up a small hand trowel. "I believe this section is for the roses," he said, looking at a set of architectural plans. "My wife was very particular about them. She said you have to dig deep to give them a strong foundation." He knelt in the dirt, the unfamiliar posture making him feel clumsy, and began to dig. Hazel watched him for a moment. Then she picked up a small spade and started digging beside him. "You have to talk to them, you know," she said matter-of-factly. Kaylin paused, a clump of dirt in his hand. "Talk to them." "To the roses," she clarified. "You have to tell them they're going to be beautiful. It helps them grow." And so, the billionaire Sheikh, a man who could command armies of lawyers and executives, spent his morning digging in the dirt next to an 8-year-old girl, whispering encouragements to rose bushes that did not yet exist. For the first time, he spoke to Hazel about Layla. He told her how his wife had designed the garden herself, how she knew the name of every single flower, and how she used to sit on the stone bench for hours, reading. "She would have liked you," Kaylin said, and the admission hung in the air between them, heavy and true. "She would have loved what you did with the seeds." As they worked, Clara came looking for her daughter, a worried expression on her face. She stopped dead when she saw the scene before her. Her daughter and the most powerful man she had ever known, sitting together in the dirt, their hands and clothes stained with earth, laughing. Kalen had just told a story about a time he had tried to help Layla plant a tree and had accidentally dug up a sprinkler pipe, flooding the entire lawn. The sound of his own laughter was as surprising to him as it was to Clara. She had never heard him laugh. She had never seen him smile. She watched for a long moment, a lump forming in her throat. She saw a glimmer of the man he must have been before the tragedy, and she saw the profound, innocent, and completely unintentional impact her daughter was having on him. She felt a surge of pride, quickly followed by a pang of fear. The world of men like Kalen Al-Jamil was a dangerous one. She hoped, with all her heart, that Hazel's simple kindness wouldn't get her hurt. Her fear was more prescient than she could possibly imagine. A few days later, Zaid found his opportunity. Kalen was away for the day, visiting the Westwood building with a team of historical restoration experts. Zaid knew that Clara's duties included the weekly deep cleaning of the master suite, including the walk-in closet where Layla's belongings were kept, untouched, like relics in a museum. Using his master keycard, Zaid slipped into the penthouse. He moved with a quiet confidence, his heart beating a steady, cold rhythm. He went directly to Kalen's private safe, the combination known only to him and his boss. Inside, nestled in velvet boxes, was Layla's jewelry. He selected a magnificent emerald necklace, a piece Kalen had given her for their last anniversary. It was famous, instantly recognizable, and something Kalen would undoubtedly notice was missing. He then went to the staff quarters, a place he had never set foot in before. The hallway was modest, clean, and smelled of lemon polish. He found the door marked Mayhew, and, after checking to make sure the corridor was empty, he let himself in. The apartment was small but tidy. A child's drawing of a smiling sun was taped to the refrigerator. A worn, comfortable-looking armchair sat in the corner next to a stack of library books. On a small bedside table was a framed photograph of a handsome, older man in a military uniform, Hazel's great-grandfather. The scene was so domestic, so normal, it almost gave Zaid pause. Almost. He went into Clara's bedroom. He opened her wardrobe and carefully slipped the emerald necklace into the pocket of an old winter coat. It was a perfect hiding place. Not obvious, but somewhere it would inevitably be found during a thorough search. His work was done. He left as silently as he had arrived. All he had to do now was wait a day or two, then discover the theft. He would suggest a discreet security sweep of the staff quarters, feigning concern for Kalen's privacy. The necklace would be found. Clara would be fired. The girl would be gone, and the world would return to its proper order. When Kalen returned that evening, he felt energized. The architects had been enthusiastic about the Westwood building. They spoke of its good bones, its timeless character. They presented him with preliminary sketches that showed how they could integrate modern technology while preserving the building's historic facade. The project was no longer about profit. It was about legacy. It was about honoring his father. He went straight to the garden. The transformation was already stunning. The overgrown weeds were gone. The flagstone paths were clean and new. Rich soil had been laid. In the center, Hazel's small patch of marigolds and morning glories stood out, a beacon of vibrant color. He found her there, watering her flowers with a proper watering can, a gift from one of the friendly gardeners. "It's looking better," he said, gesturing to the whole garden. "It's going to be the most beautiful garden in the whole world," Hazel said with certainty. Kalen smiled. He was beginning to believe her. "I have something for you," he said. He handed her a long, flat box. Hazel opened it carefully. Inside, nestled on a bed of satin, was a simple silver trowel and a matching hand spade. Engraved on the handle of each tool was her name, Hazel. Her eyes widened. She had never owned anything so beautiful. "For me," she whispered. "A proper gardener needs proper tools," Kalen said gently. "Thank you, Hazel, for reminding me how to build things, instead of just tearing them down." It was a moment of pure, unguarded connection. A billionaire and a maid's daughter, standing in a half-finished garden, bound by a shared project and an unspoken understanding. For Kalen, it was a moment of profound healing. For Hazel, it was a moment of simple joy. But hovering over them both, unseen and unheard, was the shadow of Zaid's treachery, about to descend and shatter their fragile new world. The stage was set for a betrayal that would test the very limits of Kalen's newfound humanity. The next afternoon, Zaid initiated the final phase of his plan. He walked into Kalen's office, his face a perfect mask of concern. "Kalen, I apologize for bothering you," he began. "But I was reviewing the quarterly insurance manifest for your personal assets, and I noticed something irregular. The Al Jamil emerald necklace. It's listed here, but I don't recall seeing it in the safe when we were updating the inventory last month." Kalen's brow furrowed. "That's impossible. It's always in the safe." "Perhaps," Zaid said smoothly. "But with the increased staff on the grounds for the garden renovation, perhaps it would be prudent to simply verify its location. For insurance purposes, of course." Reluctantly, Kalen agreed. They walked to the safe. Kalen spun the dial and opened the heavy door. Zaid watched, his expression neutral, as Kalen sorted through the velvet boxes. A minute later, Kalen looked up, his face grim. "It's gone," he said, his voice a low growl. The warmth that had crept into his life over the past few weeks was instantly extinguished, replaced by the familiar ice of suspicion and command. "This is a serious breach," Zaid said, his tone grave. "It must have been an inside job. The safe was not forced. Only you and I know the combination." "What are you suggesting, Zaid?" Kalen's eyes were hard. "I am suggesting that someone with access to this penthouse has betrayed your trust," Zaid said carefully. "I think we need to authorize a quiet, discreet search of the residential staff's quarters. It is the only logical place to start." Kalen hesitated. His mind immediately went to Clara and Hazel. It couldn't be. But the necklace was gone. The cold logic of his past life, the ruthless calculus of a billionaire who had been betrayed before, began to reassert itself. Trust was a luxury, and he had been careless with it. "Do it," Kalen said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Be discreet. I don't want to panic. But find that necklace." Zaid nodded, a flicker of triumph in his eyes that he quickly suppressed. "Of course, Kalen. I'll handle it personally." He left the office, his heart pounding with victory. It was working. It was all working perfectly. The little girl's brief, sunlit chapter in Kalen Al-Jamil's life was about to come to a very abrupt end. The search began an hour later. Zaid, accompanied by two of his hand-picked security guards, moved through the staff quarters with a somber, professional air. He had instructed them to be thorough but respectful, a performance designed to reinforce his loyalty and feigned reluctance in Kalen's eyes. Doors were knocked on. Rooms were entered. Apologies were given for the unfortunate necessity of the security sweep. Most of the staff, knowing the value of the items in the main residence, complied with a nervous understanding. The final room on their list was Clara Mayhew's. Clara opened the door, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Is something wrong?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Hazel was inside, sitting at the small table, carefully coloring in a picture of a garden. "I'm afraid so, Clara," Zaid said, his voice laced with false sympathy. "A valuable item has gone missing from Mr. Al-Jamil's private safe. We are conducting a routine search of all residential staff quarters. It is merely a precaution." Clara's face went pale. "Missing? Of course, come in. Search anywhere you need." She was innocent. She had nothing to hide. She stepped aside, her heart beginning to pound with a vague sense of dread. Hazel watched the large men in uniforms enter her home. She looked from their serious faces to her mother's worried expression. She clutched her crayons tightly, a knot of fear tightening in her stomach. Zaid directed the search. One guard checked the small living area. The other went into the bedroom. Zaid himself stood in the doorway, his eyes fixed on Clara, watching her composure begin to fray. "We are almost finished," the guard in the bedroom called out. "Just checking the wardrobe." There was a moment of silence. "Then, sir, I think you should see this." Zaid walked into the bedroom. Clara followed, her legs feeling unsteady. The guard was holding her old, dark blue winter coat. From its deep pocket, he slowly pulled the Al-Jamil emerald necklace. It seemed to suck all the light from the room. The green stones glittered malevolently in the dim light, each one a tiny, accusing eye. Time stopped. For Clara, the world tilted on its axis. She stared at the necklace, her mind unable to process what she was seeing. It was a phantom, an impossibility lying in the palm of the guard's hand. I don't understand," she stammered, shaking her head. That's not mine. I've never seen that before in my life. It was in your coat, ma'am, the guard said, his voice flat and official. Clara Mayhew, Zaid said, his voice now cold and hard, the mask of sympathy gone. This is a profound and disgusting betrayal of the trust Mr. Al-Jamil placed in you. No, Clara cried, her voice breaking. I swear to you, I didn't take it. I would never steal anything. You have to believe me. Hazel, hearing her mother's distress, ran into the room. She saw the glittering necklace and the tears streaming down her mother's face. She didn't understand what was happening, but she knew it was terrible. She ran to her mother, wrapping her small arms around her legs. Mommy, what's wrong? Take the necklace and secure it, Zaid ordered the guard, completely ignoring the child. Clara, you will come with me to see Mr. Al-Jamil. Pack a bag. Your employment here is terminated. No, please. Clara begged, her voice dissolving into sobs. Please, Zaid, I'm innocent. I swear on my daughter's life. But Zaid's face was made of stone. He had won. He turned and walked out, leaving the guards to escort the now hysterical woman from her home. They were brought to Kalen's private study. It was a vast, silent room, lined with books he never read. Kalen sat behind his massive mahogany desk, his face unreadable. The emerald necklace lay on the polished wood in front of him, a pool of green poison. Clara stood before him, her body trembling. Hazel clung to her, her face buried in her mother's skirt, her small shoulders shaking. Explain this, Kalen said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. All the warmth Hazel had brought into his life had vanished, replaced by the arctic cold of betrayal. His world had been violated, and the evidence pointed to the one person who, besides her daughter, had gotten closest to him. Sir, I can't, Clara wept. I don't know how it got there. I swear to you, I am not a thief. In all my years of service, have I ever given you a reason to doubt my integrity? Kalen's gaze was unflinching. Until today, no? But the evidence is damning. You had access. You had proximity. And the necklace was found in your possession. Someone put it there, she insisted, her voice raw with desperation. It's a mistake. A trick. From behind his desk, Kalen's world was once again a simple, brutal equation. Trust had been extended. Trust had been broken. The pain of it was sharp, not just because of the theft, but because it felt like a confirmation of his darkest view of the world, that everyone, eventually, lets you down. And the fact that this betrayal was tied to the little girl who had started to heal him made it 1,000 times worse. He felt like a fool, a sentimental old fool who had let his guard down and paid the price. Zaid, standing silently by the door, watched the scene with grim satisfaction. Kalen was reverting to form, becoming the cold, decisive man he had always been. The man Zaid knew how to manipulate. The authorities should be called, Zaid said quietly but firmly. This is a felony. Hearing this, Hazel finally looked up. Her face was tear-streaked and pale. She looked past her sobbing mother, past the impassive guards, and directly at Kalen. She let go of her mother's skirt and took a small step forward. The sad king wouldn't do that, she said, her small voice cutting through the tension in the room. Kalen's eyes snapped to her. The name she had given him, a name born of childish innocence, now felt like a judgment. My mommy isn't a thief, Hazel said, her voice trembling but clear. My great-grandpa was a hero. He won a medal for being honest. We don't steal. We're Mayhews. She said the name as if it were a shield, a declaration of honor that could not be breached. For a heart-stopping moment, Kalen faltered. He looked at the girl's fierce, trusting eyes, eyes that had seen him not as a billionaire or a sheikh, but as a sad man who needed a flower. He saw the unwavering belief in her mother's innocence. A sliver of doubt pierced his armor of cynical certainty. What if she was right? What if this was a mistake? Zaid saw the hesitation. He had to act quickly. Kalen, he said, his voice softening, full of reason. The girl is upset. She doesn't understand. Think of your position. If you let this go, you send a message to your entire staff that you are a weak, easy target. It is a matter of security, of principle. Zaid's words were the voice of Kalen's past. They spoke of strength, control, and the ruthless logic that had built his empire. They were familiar. They were safe. The girl's plea spoke of trust, faith, and an emotional vulnerability that had already brought him nothing but pain. Kalen closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, the ice was back, harder than before. He had made his decision. "I will not call the police," he said, and for a brief second, Clara's heart leaped with hope. The scandal would be inconvenient. He paused, his gaze sweeping over them with cold finality. "But you will leave this estate immediately. You will be given 1 hour to collect your belongings under supervision. You will sign a non-disclosure agreement, and in return, I will not press charges. That is my final offer." The hope in Clara's chest died, turning to a cold, hard stone of despair. It was a corporate execution, not a search for justice. She was being erased. "But where will we go?" she whispered, her fight gone, replaced by the terrifying reality of her situation. She was a single mother with no job, no home, and now, no reference. "That is no longer my concern," Kalen said, turning his attention to some papers on his desk, a clear dismissal. "Zaid, see to it." "Mommy," Hazel whispered, pulling on her mother's hand. "What's happening?" Clara knelt and hugged her daughter tightly, trying to shield her from the wreckage of their lives. "We have to go, sweetie," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "We're going on a little trip." As the guards led them out, Hazel looked back one last time at the man behind the desk. He wasn't looking at them. He was staring at the emerald necklace, his face a mask of stone. He no longer looked like a sad king. He just looked empty. An hour later, a taxi pulled away from the service entrance of the Al-Jamil estate. Inside, Clara held her daughter close, staring blankly at the life that was disappearing behind her. Hazel sat silently, her new silver trowel clutched in her hand. She didn't cry. She was a Mayhew, and Mayhews were strong. But in her heart, she couldn't understand how something that had started with a seed of happiness had ended in such a terrible, thorny mess. Back in the penthouse, Kalen stood by the window, the emerald necklace cold in his hand. He had done the logical thing, the necessary thing. He had protected his assets and re-established order. He had cut out the rot. So why did he feel like he had just amputated his own heart? He looked down at the garden. The new plants were in place. The fountains were flowing. And in the center of it all was a vibrant patch of orange and blue. Hazel's flowers. They looked defiant, alive, and unbearably beautiful in the dying light. The garden was coming back to life, but the man who owned it was sinking back into the darkness. The silence in the penthouse returned, heavier and more profound than ever before. Zaid had won. The variable had been removed. And Kalen Al-Jamil was alone once more. The days that followed were a return to the old silence, but it was a different, more malevolent kind. Before, it had been the quiet of emptiness. Now, it was the quiet of a guilty conscience. Kalen oversaw the completion of the Memorial Garden's restoration. It was, by all accounts, a masterpiece. The fountains danced, the exotic flowers bloomed, and the rose bushes were thriving. But it was a hollow victory. He would walk the pristine paths and see not Layla's memory, but the ghost of a little girl with a silver trowel. Hazel's patch of marigolds and morning glories remained in the center, a vibrant, joyful testament to a kindness he had repaid with brutal injustice. The sight of them was a daily torment. He tried to immerse himself in work. With the distraction of Clara and Hazel gone, Zaid began to gently reintroduce the idea of demolishing the Westwood building, arguing that Kalen's initial, logical decision had been the correct one. Kalen would listen, his face a stony mask, but the words no longer held the same power. Hazel's parting words echoed in the silence of his mind. "My great-grandpa was a hero. We're Mayhews." It was a declaration of identity, of an inherited honor she believed was unbreakable. He had dismissed it as a child's naivete, but it haunted him. One night, unable to sleep, he found himself in his private library. On a whim, he typed a name into his computer's search bar, Sergeant Walter Mayhew. The results were instantaneous. Sergeant Mayhew was not just a veteran. He was a decorated hero, awarded the Silver Star for gallantry. Kalen read articles and military records detailing a life lived by a strict code of honor. He saw photos of a proud man with kind eyes, Hazel's eyes. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the granddaughter of such a man was not a thief. He had made a terrible, terrible mistake. His reality began to crumble. If Clara was innocent, the necklace had been planted. There was only one other person with the knowledge and access to have done it. His mind raced, replaying recent events. Zaid's pressure to demolish the building, his convenient discovery of the theft, his careful manipulation of Kalen's anger. It all clicked into place, a horrifying mosaic of betrayal. The next morning, Kalen went to his security headquarters. "I want the complete, unedited surveillance logs from the past week," he told the new head of security. "Every camera, every key card entry." Alone in the darkened control room, he scanned hours of footage. And then he found it. A brief, 2-minute clip from the staff quarters corridor, showing Zaid furtively looking around before using his master key card to slip into Clara Mayhew's apartment. He emerged less than a minute later, his face calm and composed. It was the quiet, irrefutable proof of a betrayal so deep it took Kalen's breath away. He summoned Zaid to his study. Zaid entered with a confident smile, holding a folder. "Kalen, I have the revised demolition contracts." "Sit down," Kalen said. His voice was quiet, but it held a lethal edge that made Zaid's smile falter. On the large screen behind the desk, the security footage began to play. Zaid's face went ashen, the folder slipping from his fingers. "You have been my most trusted advisor for 10 years, Kalen said, his voice dangerously soft. "I treated you like a brother, and you used my grief to try and destroy me." Zaid stammered. "Kalen, it's not what it looks like. I was investigating." "Stop," Kalen commanded, rising from his chair. He was no longer a sad king. He was a titan, awakened and enraged. "You framed an innocent woman and her child. You tried to manipulate me into destroying my own father's legacy. This was a takeover." Zaid's silence was his confession. "Security." Kalen's roar echoed through the penthouse. 2 guards entered. "Escort this man from the premises. He is to take nothing. His assets will be frozen, and my legal team will be in touch." Zaid was dragged from the room, his empire of lies having crumbled to dust. The fury receded, leaving Kalen with a profound, crushing shame. He had allowed his pain to make him blind, and an innocent family had paid the price. Fixing the damage was not enough. He needed to seek forgiveness. He hired the best private investigators in the country. "Find Clara and Hazel Mayhew," he ordered. "I don't care what it costs." The search took a week. Finally, the call came. They were living in a small, rundown apartment 50 miles away. Clara was working double shifts as a waitress in a diner. Kalen drove there himself, in a simple sedan, feeling he had no right to approach them cloaked in the wealth that had caused their suffering. The apartment building was grim. He knocked on the door of 3B. Clara opened it. When she saw him, her face registered shock, then fear. She immediately tried to close the door. "Please," Kalen said, his voice thick with a humility he had never known. "Clara, I'm here to apologize." Hazel came to the door and peeked around her mother. There was no anger in her expression, only a quiet, sad disappointment. "I have made a terrible mistake," Kalen began. "I know what Zaid did. He framed you. I have proof. There are no words to express how sorry I am. I was a fool, a blind, arrogant fool, and you paid the price for it. I am here to ask for your forgiveness, though I know I have not earned it." Clara stared at him, tears of profound exhaustion in her eyes. "Do you know what this week has been like?" she whispered. "Trying to find a place to live, a job, trying to explain to my daughter why the world can be so unfair." "I know," Kalen said, his own eyes stinging. "And I am here to make it right, whatever it takes." He offered her everything, her job back with a raise, a new apartment, a trust fund for Hazel's education. Clara was silent. Then, Hazel walked past her mother and stood before Kalen. She was holding a small, potted plant with a single, bright orange marigold. "This one was from a seed I saved," she said, holding it up to him. "You can't let one bad weed ruin the whole garden. You just have to pull it out and keep growing." With that simple, profound wisdom, Kalen Al-Jamil's carefully constructed world broke completely. He knelt, not as a sheikh or a billionaire, but as a penitent man, and tears streamed down his face. He had lost everything 5 years ago, but in that moment, he finally began to find himself. 6 months later, the memorial garden was a public jewel, a gift to the city in Layla's name. Clara was reinstated as the head of household, and the Westwood building was being restored as a museum of city history, its main gallery named the Sergeant Walter Mayhew Hall of Honor. One sunny afternoon, Kalen sat on the stone bench, no longer a sad king, but a man at peace. He watched Hazel, the garden's official chief assistant gardener, showing other children how to plant tulip bulbs. She ran over to him, her face smudged with dirt. "They're doing it wrong," she whispered conspiratorially. "They forgot to talk to the flowers." Kalen laughed, a real, deep laugh that reached his eyes. "Well then," he said, getting to his feet, "I think they need an expert." He walked with her, hand in hand, back to the flower bed. He had learned the hardest lesson of his life. A single dollar, in the hands of a pure heart, was more powerful than a billion in the hands of an empty one. It couldn't buy happiness, but it could plant the seeds. And with enough care, those seeds could grow into a future more beautiful than he had ever dared to imagine. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe relaxing after work, on a late-night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our stories, so feel free to also drop your feedback in the comment section below. Thanks for spending this time with me.